It's tough to pinpoint exactly when things started feeling wrong between us. Now, looking back, it seems so obvious, like the signs were all right there, clear as day. But when you're right in the thick of it, living it, it's like trying to peer through a fogged-up window. Mira and I had 10 solid years together. Not some picture-perfect fairy tale romance you hear about, but real, messy years filled with ups and downs. Sure, we argued over the usual stuff, money, family events, but I thought we had a rhythm, something steady, something real. When Mira got her promotion, I was over the moon for her. She'd worked so hard to get there, sacrificing evenings and even taking calls right in the middle of our dinner. I put it down to her drive and ambition, which, honestly, she always had more of than me. The pay raise was nice, no doubt, but it came with a lot of travel. Suddenly, every couple of weeks, she'd be off somewhere, jetting away for some important team meeting or critical project. At first, I didn't think much of it, but gradually, I started noticing little changes. When she came home, it was like she was different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. She'd walk through the door looking worn down in a way I hadn't seen before, with this strange, faraway look in her eyes, as if she were miles away even while sitting right next to me. Our conversations turned shallow. She barely engaged, brushing off anything deeper with a quick answer. When I asked about her trips, she'd just mumble something short and say she was too exhausted to talk. I let it go, thinking maybe work was simply wearing her down. Then one night, my buddy Ethan brought it up, too. We were out, just me and a few of the guys, kicking back with some beers. Out of nowhere, Ethan asks, "Hey man, everything okay between you and Mira? She doesn't seem like herself lately." I tried laughing it off, didn't want to read too much into it, but he kept pushing. "No, really," he said, sounding concerned. "At that work event last month, she barely talked to anyone. She used to be the life of the party." Hearing it from someone else stung. I'd been telling myself she was just stressed, that it was all work-related, but now Ethan had noticed too. That's when this feeling started gnawing at me, like a thorn that just wouldn't let up. I shrugged it off outwardly, but inside, it was all I could think about. A few days later, I thought maybe I'd surprise her at work, take her out for lunch, remind her of what was waiting for her at home. I knew her schedule well enough, so I showed up around noon. Her secretary, Nina, a young, overly cheerful woman who seemed too chipper for a Monday, saw me and lit up with that happy-to-see-the-husband look. "Oh, Mr. Samuel, Myra's already left for a meeting with a colleague," she said brightly. She said it so casually, like it was nothing. But that word, colleague, hit me. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, "Which colleague?" Nina shrugged, not knowing, and said they'd gone to some off-site meeting a while ago. I thanked her and left, but on the drive home, my mind was racing. Who was this colleague? Why hadn't Mira mentioned the meeting? That night, I waited up for her. When she finally walked through the door, exhaustion was all over her face, and she barely glanced my way before heading to the bedroom. I followed, casually asking how her meeting went. She shot me a look, half annoyed, half surprised. "It was fine, just work," she muttered, brushing me off. I kept pressing, still acting casual, asking if she'd been with anyone from her team. She hesitated just for a split second, but enough for me to notice. "Just Leo," she finally said, her voice too steady. "You remember Leo, right? From my team." Oh, I knew who Leo was. Young, single, too good-looking for his own good. She'd mentioned him in passing, said he was nice to work with. But hearing her say his name now, with that slight hesitation, made my stomach drop. I nodded like it was nothing, but inside, every instinct was on high alert. Over the next few weeks, I started watching her more closely. Small things stood out. She'd get a text, and her face would shift. Sometimes a smile, sometimes a slight frown. It always looked private, like something she didn't want me to see. Whenever I asked, she'd shrug it off, calling it work stuff. I tried to believe her. I wanted to believe her, but that feeling inside me kept growing, creeping up on me like some kind of infection. Then one night out with Ethan, he brought it up again. We were at our usual pub, and he looked uncomfortable before speaking. "Look, I don't want to interfere," he started hesitant. But I saw Mira with some guy at that work event last week. They looked close. I stared at my beer, feeling the weight of his words hit me hard. Did you notice anything else? I asked, trying to sound calm. He shook his head. Just that she was talking to him a lot. Nothing inappropriate, if that's what you're asking. But it was enough. I couldn't shake the image he'd put in my head. Everything started clicking. The long nights, the dodged calls, her vague answers. I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was like a poison, eating away at me. Part of me wanted to confront her right there and then, but another part wondered, what if I was wrong? That's when I thought of Vivian, Myra's younger sister. She'd never really been Myra's biggest fan and always felt a bit like an outsider in the family. I wasn't especially close to her, but we got along, and I figured if anyone had noticed something, it would be her. So, after a night stewing in my thoughts, I called her up. Vivian answered right away, her familiar voice warm but cautious. Hey, Sam. Is everything okay? I hesitated, feeling like a stranger to my own voice. Honestly, Vivian, I'm not even sure why I'm calling. I need to talk to someone about Mira. There was a pause, a silence that told me she knew exactly where I was going. Meet me at the cafe on 5th in about an hour, she said, her tone soft but firm. I agreed, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. When I walked into the cafe, Vivian was already there, swirling her coffee absently, her face serious. She gave me a sympathetic smile. You look terrible, Sam. What's going on? I sat down, taking a deep breath. It's Mira. Something's been off for a while now. She's distant, and there's this guy, Leo. I stopped, not sure what else to say. I think she's hiding something. Vivian's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing. You think she's having an affair? She asked quietly, leaning in closer. Her voice was steady, but there was a sharpness to her gaze, like she'd been expecting this. I nodded, barely able to get the words out. She didn't mince her words. You're not crazy, Sam. I've noticed it too. She's different, colder. You're not the only one who's picked up on it. She glanced away, her face hardening. I've seen her at that cafe on 8th more times than I can count, which is odd for someone who's supposedly too busy to even make a call. Her words felt like blows, each one landing right where my fears already were. Do you think it's Leo? I asked, hoping she'd say no. But Vivian just shook her head. I don't know, but he's definitely involved somehow. I can keep an eye out if you want. See if anything else comes up. Vivian was trying to stay composed, but I caught a glimpse of something darker in her eyes. A fierce protectiveness. What started as a conversation about Mira turned into something unexpectedly comforting. We didn't just stick to talking about her. Somehow, we found ourselves venturing into deeper territory. Life's disappointments, the kind of stuff you can't bring up in polite conversation. Vivian shared her own experiences, her struggles with relationships, and the loneliness she often felt as the family's black sheep. Strangely enough, in the middle of my own mess, we found common ground. As we were about to leave, Vivian rested a gentle hand on my arm. Sam, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. For real. Her voice held a sincerity that felt strangely grounding. I managed a weak smile and nodded. For the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't as alone in this as I'd thought. The following week, Vivian and I met up again, both of us more prepared for what was to come. We had decided to try and catch Mira in her element at that cafe on 8th. Vivian had already been staking it out a few times, checking to see if Myra's meetings actually lined up with her work schedule. Spoiler, they didn't. That Tuesday, we slipped into the back of the cafe, hiding ourselves behind a wall of leafy ferns and overly cheery decor. Vivian ordered coffee, but I was too wound up to even think about food or drink. My eyes stayed glued to the door, anxiety twisting in my stomach. After what felt like an eternity, Mira walked in, with Leo trailing behind her, looking far too comfortable in her presence. They chose a spot by the window, and I felt a sickening wave of anger and betrayal wash over me. Vivian put a steadying hand on my arm. Hold on, she whispered. We don't want to blow this. Let's just watch. I nodded, forcing myself to stay put, to breathe through the tension. They ordered drinks, talking and laughing, her hand grazing his arm now and then, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Felt like a slap to the face. Every time she leaned in, each laugh, each smile, it was like I was watching a stranger in my wife's body. "I can't do this," I whispered, looking away, fighting back the bile rising in my throat. Vivian's grip tightened. "Just a little longer, Sam. We need to see this through." After what seemed like hours, Leo finally left. I watched him go, my insides churning with the urge to confront him, to demand answers. But instead, I stayed in place, watching Mira sip her coffee with this relaxed, contented look. A look I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Once she'd gone, Vivian turned to me, her expression set with determination. "This isn't over, Sam. We're going to find out exactly what's happening." Her words were like a lifeline, something to hold on to as my world spun out of control. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the memory of Myra's laugh. It echoed in my head, mocking me, reminding me just how little I seemed to know her anymore. When I finally got back, she was already there, her face unreadable as she greeted me, like she hadn't just been cozied up to Leo hours before. I didn't mention a word about what I'd seen. I kept my mouth shut, letting the resentment sit there, festering, waiting for the right moment to let it explode. And Vivian didn't abandon me. She was with me through it all, her loyalty and strength becoming an odd source of comfort I never thought I'd need. After that day at the cafe, the last bit of faith I'd clung to was shattered. I couldn't deny what I saw, but I also couldn't bring myself to confront Mira. Not without proof, something solid. If she was going to tear down everything we'd built, it wasn't going to be with vague answers and flimsy excuses. Vivian and I put together a plan. She reminded me of a corporate event Mira had mentioned, a big gala or some awards night. I couldn't recall exactly what it was for, but I did remember that Mira had made a point to tell me I couldn't come. "It's only for employees," she tossed out casually, an excuse that grated on me then and now made perfect sense. We saw it for what it was, a chance to see the truth. The night of the event, Vivian and I arrived early. We parked well away from the venue, staying out of sight. I felt like some kind of amateur detective in a cheesy movie, but desperation will make you do things you never thought you would. I hadn't told anyone else what I was up to. This mission was just between Vivian and me. Even Ethan, who'd first called out Myra's strange behavior, didn't know about any of this. Vivian had already scoped out the place and figured out a side entrance. With her help, we slipped inside unnoticed, our guest passes allowing us to blend in while we kept to the edges. Mira was easy to spot. She wore a dark green dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled to perfection, laughing and mingling with her colleagues as if everything were perfectly fine. And then, of course, I saw him, Leo. The way they maneuvered around each other was subtle, almost like a practice dance. They'd drift apart and then back together again, as if they were connected by an invisible pull. I saw him lean in to whisper something in her ear, and her laughter rang out. A laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. "Stay calm, Sam," Vivian murmured, sensing the anger boiling inside me. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to stay focused. "I just need to know," I muttered under my breath, barely aware I'd said it out loud. We continued watching, keeping our distance, waiting for the moment they'd slip away together. And then, as if following a script, Mira and Leo exchanged a look that spoke louder than words. They left the main hall together, moving down a dim hallway toward a more private area. "Follow me," Vivian whispered, taking charge. We trailed them, keeping enough distance to stay out of sight but close enough to catch every movement. They ducked into a room at the end of the corridor, closing the door softly behind them. My heart was pounding so loud I was convinced they'd hear it. Vivian touched my arm gently. "Wait here. Let me check." Before I could argue, she slipped away, moving with a confidence I didn't know she had. I stood there in the dark, each second stretching out painfully. Finally, she returned, her face pale but resolute. "It's them, Sam. They're in there together." That was it, cold, hard reality staring me down. part of me felt like I was plummeting into nothing, but another part, oddly enough, felt relieved. The doubts were gone, replaced by a brutal, undeniable truth. I hadn't been imagining things. It wasn't all in my head. "I can't believe it," I murmured, feeling a strange numbness take over. But Vivian wasn't done. "There's something else," she said, glancing back toward the hallway. "It's not just Leo. There's another guy I saw around her earlier, trying to get her attention." I blinked, barely processing what she was saying. "Who?" "A guy named Owen. He's younger, works in her department. I saw him cozying up to her earlier." She brushed him off. "But, I don't know, Sam. I think she's actually enjoying this. Every bit of the attention, the flirting, that real vibration hit me like a punch to the gut. The woman I'd trusted with everything, the one I'd built my life around, was treating our marriage like some meaningless fling. Just thinking about it made my stomach churn. After that night, I knew Vivian's observations weren't enough. I needed something indisputable, proof I couldn't deny or question. So, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I hired a private investigator, a guy named Andrew who came highly recommended. Meeting him at a quiet bar a few days later, I felt like every word I said was sealing the fate of my marriage. Andrew didn't ask questions. He'd been down this road before. He just gave me a serious, hard look and handed over his business card. "You'll get what you need soon enough," he said, his tone all business. Over the following weeks, Andrew brought me more than I'd expected. There were pictures of Mira with Leo, hotel receipts, dinner bills, all laid out in black and white, a cold confirmation of how far she'd gone. One night, I was sitting in my kitchen, sifting through all the evidence, when Vivian stopped by to check on me. She sat across from me, eyeing the photos and receipts spread across the table. "You holding up okay?" she asked softly. I looked up, meeting her gaze, feeling the weight of everything. "Honestly, I don't know." Her expression was warm and understanding in a way I hadn't realized I needed. "It's just a mess," I added. She nodded, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I know, Sam, but you're not alone in this. You've got people who care about you." Her words landed harder than I'd expected. In that moment, Vivian wasn't just Myra's sister. She was someone who understood my pain, someone who'd seen me at my lowest without judgment. We sat together in silence, just sharing the same space, and it felt oddly grounding. Vivian had become my anchor, the one person keeping me from spiraling too far. Despite all the betrayal and heartbreak, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The more I dug through Myra's betrayal, the more the hurt twisted into something darker, something bitter. I kept asking myself how she could do this, how the person I thought I knew could lie and betray me so thoroughly. But the evidence was there, staring back at me, undeniable. No amount of staring at those photos or bills could change the truth of what she'd done to our life. In those heavy, quiet moments, Vivian became my refuge. She wasn't just aware of Myra's affair. She felt its impact deeply. Maybe it was because she knew Mira better than anyone, or maybe because she too had been sidelined and hurt in her own ways. Whatever it was, we found a connection I hadn't anticipated. A lifeline I clung to as everything I knew unraveled. One evening, Vivian showed up with a bottle of bourbon, the kind that hits hard and fast, perfect for a night like this. She sat across from me in the dim living room light, the table between us strewn with papers and photos, a crime scene in black and white. "You sure you want to keep all this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she gestured at the pile of evidence Andrew had gathered. "You've got more proof than you need." I shrugged, taking another sip. "I don't know. I just can't believe it's real." She nodded, her expression softening in a way that cut through my anger, hitting the sadness underneath. "Yeah, I get that." She placed her hand over mine, steady and warm. We talked that night, not just about Mira, but about our lives, our regrets, the dreams that had faded over time. I opened up in ways I hadn't let myself in years, saying things I didn't even realize I'd been holding on to. Vivian listened, judgment-free, a quiet reassurance that maybe I wasn't so alone in this after all. Then, there was a silence, a heavy, loaded pause filled with everything we hadn't said. I looked down at her hand resting on mine, feeling something unexpected. A flicker of warmth, a sense of connection that had been missing for too long. I tried to ignore it, to brush it aside, but it lingered. "Vivian?" I murmured, unsure of what I even wanted to say. She looked up, meeting my gaze with an intensity that sent a shiver through me. "Sam!" She stopped, her voice catching. For a moment, I thought she'd pull back, that we'd leave it there and not cross any lines. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned in closer, her hand still resting on mine, her breath warm against my skin. And before I knew it, we crossed that line. A boundary we both knew was there but ignored anyway. What started as comfort turned into something more, something that was both a betrayal and a release. In that moment, the anger, the heartbreak, the betrayal, they all fell away. For the first time in months, I felt something real, something honest. When it was over, we sat there, neither of us speaking. I half expected regret, maybe shame, to rush in, but instead, there was only a quiet acceptance. A strange peace amid all the chaos. Vivian looked at me, her gaze soft but serious. It doesn't have to mean anything," she murmured, as if talking to herself as much as to me. She went on quietly, "Maybe it's just the hurt, the anger." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I didn't know what it meant or if it even mattered. All I knew was that, for once, I felt seen, understood in a way that went deeper than words. In the days that followed, I focused on what I had to do. I met with Andrew again, reviewing the latest evidence, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation with Mira. Every time I thought about it, anger flared up, a bitterness that left a bitter taste in my mouth. But then I'd think of Vivian and that night we shared, and somehow, it made the whole ordeal feel just a little more bearable. A week later, Vivian came over again. We sat in my kitchen, a stack of photos and documents between us, going over everything one last time. It was surreal, like we were plotting the downfall of the woman who'd wronged us both. But there was something more. A quiet, unspoken bond that went beyond revenge or betrayal. It was just us, two people left with nothing but each other in the wreckage. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice steady, but her eyes held a hint of concern, something softer. I met her gaze, feeling the weight of everything settle on me. "Honestly, I'm not sure, but it's time. I can't keep living like this." She nodded, squeezing my hand. "I'm here, Sam, for whatever you need." Those words, as simple as they were, struck deep. Vivian had been there through every low point, every moment of doubt and anger. She was there when I'd had no one else, when everything I knew was falling apart. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of clarity. Months had slipped by with me lurking in the shadows, piecing together the shards of a betrayal I never saw coming. I'd clung to my anger and pain, holding them close like a lifeline. But now, I knew it was time to face it head-on, to lay it all out in the open and see where the pieces would land. Before I left, I sent Vivian a quick message, just a simple, "Thank you for everything." I didn't expect a reply, but a moment later, my phone buzzed. "You're not alone in this, Sam. Remember that." Her words lingered as I drove, a reminder of the bond we'd built, forged in the ashes of betrayal and pain. No matter what happened next, whatever this final showdown with Mira brought, I knew Vivian would be there. She'd become a steady anchor, a reminder that there were still people who truly saw me. This was it. It was time to face Mira. I had every piece of proof laid out, every damning detail assembled like it could somehow make the pain feel organ-vived, manageable. But nothing about this was under control. Our marriage, my life, they were both shattered, a mess I could barely hold in my hands. When Mira returned from her latest business trip, I was ready. I waited in the living room, the evidence spread across the coffee table like some grotesque display, a testimony to every lie she'd spun. She walked in, her face bright and ready with some story, probably rehearsed, completely unaware that her excuses were worthless now. The moment she saw me and the photos, receipts, everything Andrew had gathered, her face fell. What is all this, Sam?" she stammered, her eyes flicking over the table, landing on the hotel bills, the snapshots of her and Leo in ways I never should have had to see. "It's everything you thought you could hide from me, Mira," I replied, my voice as even as I could manage. "Every lie. Every time you looked me in the eyes and fed me some line about late meetings and business trips." I shook my head, my anger rising. "Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" Her eyes widened, panic flickering across her face, but she tried to regain control, taking a deep breath and lifting her chin. "Sam, you're misunderstanding. This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" I leaned forward, barely containing the fury boiling inside me. "So what exactly am I misunderstanding here? The photos? The hotel rooms? The texts?" I threw her phone at her feet, already unlocked to show the messages to Leo. I'd read enough to know everything I needed. Every word was like a knife to the heart. She picked up the phone, staring at it like she was seeing it for the first time. "You went through my phone?" she demanded, as if that was the issue here. I laughed bitterly, disgust twisting in my gut. "You're unbelievable. After all of this, after all the years I trusted you, you're trying to act like the victim." She flinched, her face crumpling for a split second before she steadied herself. "You don't get it, Sam," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "You haven't exactly been around for me. You've been distant, cold. I was alone. And Leo, he was there." That hit a nerve. I stood up, the last of my restraint slipping. "Don't you dare try to blame me. I wasn't the one sneaking around, lying to your face. You made this choice, Mira. You decided to throw away everything we built for a fling." She threw her hands up, like she was the one who'd been wronged. "And what about you, huh? You're not innocent either. I know about you and Vivian." Her accusation hung in the air, bitter and toxic. I blinked, caught off guard, but only for a second. I straightened, meeting her gaze with a cold finality. "Yeah, I won't deny it. But don't try twisting this around, Mira. This is on you. Whatever's between Vivian and me, that came after. After you threw our marriage away." She scoffed, her expression darkening with contempt. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Like you haven't changed. Like you didn't just check out on me without a word." "I checked out because you pushed me out." My voice rose, harsher than I intended, breaking with the weight of everything I'd been holding in. "I tried, Mira. For years I tried. But you became someone I didn't even reconvive. Someone who could lie to my face every day and feel nothing. And all this time, you were laughing at me behind my back, making a fool of me." She went silent, her defiance slipping, something sad and worn showing through. "Sam!" Her gaze fell to the floor, and for the first time, I thought I saw a hint of remorse. Or maybe it was just the sting of getting caught. At that moment, I didn't care anymore. We stood there in silence, the shattered remains of our marriage lying between us. I took a deep breath, forcing out the words I needed to say to finally break free. "It's over, Mira. There's nothing left to save. I'm done." Her eyes widened with a flicker of shock, maybe even fear. You don't mean that." "Yes, I do." My voice was hollow, but unyielding. "I deserve better than this. Better than you." We stared at each other for a long moment, two strangers who had once shared a life, now divided by truths that couldn't be ignored. She didn't argue, didn't beg for forgiveness. She just turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the empty shell of what we'd once had. After she left, I stayed there, staring at the doorway, feeling the anger drain away, leaving a strange, hollow ache. I was free, but at a cost that cut deep. My marriage, my life, it all felt like something I barely reconvived, a memory belonging to someone else. A few hours later, Vivian came by. I hadn't told her anything, but she took one look at me and understood. She pulled me into a hug, no words, just the steady warmth of her presence. For the first time, something broke inside me, a wall I'd kept up far too long. I pulled back, looking into her eyes, feeling something real and solid, more honest than anything I'd felt with Mira in years. "Thank you, Viv, for everything." She offered a small, sad smile, brushing her hand gently across my cheek. You don't have to thank me, Sam. I'm just here. I didn't know what the future held or if Vivian and I could build something out of the ruins of our broken lives. But in that moment, I felt a glimmer of hope, a part of myself I thought was lost. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone anymore. The days that followed felt like picking at an open wound. The rage had faded, leaving a raw emptiness in its place, a stillness where our life together had been. She moved out that night. No grand goodbyes, just a few muttered words about needing space. I didn't fight it. There was nothing left to say, no words that could undo what was done. I simply watched her go, feeling the weight of a life now divided. In those first few days, Vivian was there in ways I hadn't expected. She stayed close, keeping me grounded when the loneliness threatened to pull me under. There were nights she'd come over, and we'd just sit quietly together, no words needed. Her presence softened the sting of solitude, making the emptiness feel a little less heavy, a little less sharp. One evening, she appeared at my door with a bottle of wine and a lopsided smile. Thought you could use some company, she said, her voice steady but warm. I let her in, grateful for her familiar comfort, the way she seemed to know just what I needed. We settled in on the couch, the silence between us easy and unforced. As we sipped the wine, our conversation drifted to memories from our past, small moments from childhood that had nearly faded under the weight of everything that had happened. We laughed, filling the room with stories of simpler times, moments untouched by betrayal or heartbreak. At one point, she looked at me, her eyes soft and searching. You know, I never thought we'd end up here, like this. I nodded, a bittersweet smile crossing my face. Me neither. But maybe it's not such a bad thing. I paused, finding the words. You've been here for me, Viv, in ways I didn't even realize I needed. I don't know what I would have done without you. She smiled, reaching over to cover my hand with hers. You don't have to go through this alone, Sam. I'm here for whatever you need. In that moment, I felt a quiet certainty, a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. This wasn't about rushing into something new. It was about giving myself the chance to heal, to feel something other than the anger and hurt. Vivian and I hadn't planned this closeness that had grown between us. But life has a way of finding beauty even in broken places. Over the next few months, we let things grow naturally, without expectations or pressure. Vivian was patient, never pushing me to move faster than I was ready for. She understood the scars Mira had left behind, and somehow, she managed to give me space while staying close enough to be there when I needed her. One weekend, we took a trip to a small cabin she'd rented up north, nestled by a quiet lake surrounded by tall trees. We spent our days hiking, talking about the dreams we'd buried and fears we'd kept hidden. It felt like a clean slate, a chance to look forward instead of constantly looking back. One morning, as the sun rose over the lake, painting the water in hues of orange and pink, Vivian turned to me, a gentle smile on her lips. I never thought I'd find peace here, with you, after everything we've been through. But this just feels right. I looked at her, feeling a steady calm settle over me. It does, I said, pulling her close. Maybe this is exactly where we're supposed to be. Over time, my friends noticed the change. Ethan was the first to bring it up one evening as we sat around a fire in his backyard. The familiar warmth of their company soothing scars I didn't realize were still raw. You seem happier, man, he said with a nudge and a grin. Guess things worked out with Vivian, huh? I nodded, a genuine smile breaking through. Yeah, she's something special. The guys exchanged glances, giving me their silent support. For the first time in a long while, I felt whole, like I was finally stepping forward instead of staring back at the fragments of a life that no longer fit. Then came the hardest part, filing for divorce. It wasn't about revenge or anger anymore. It was about closure, about freeing myself from something that once meant everything but had become a reminder of betrayal. I went through the motions, signing the papers, attending the meetings, feeling a strange relief as that final weight lifted. When the divorce was finally viewed, Vivian was there outside the courthouse, waiting for me. She didn't need to say anything. She just wrapped me in a hug, her arms solid and warm, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe, like the weight of the past had finally eased. She pulled back, her gaze meeting mine, a hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. So, what now? I took a deep breath, feeling the freedom of a new beginning within reach. Now we make a life for ourselves, a real one, built on trust, built on us. From that day forward, Vivian and I focused on the future, letting the wounds of the past heal in their own time. It wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but it was real and it was ours. Together, we faced the hard days, the moments of doubt, building a bond that was deeper, more honest than anything I'd known before. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our new place, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Vivian reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "Sam," she said softly, "I know this journey has been messy, and it's taken us down roads we never expected, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." I looked at her, the truth of her words resonating deeply. "Neither would I. I never thought I'd find you, but here we are." And with that, I let the past fade away, knowing that I'd found something stronger, something enduring, in the arms of someone who'd been there all along. Life had thrown us together in the most unexpected way, but sometimes the hardest roads lead to where you're meant to be. As the night settled around us, I knew that whatever came next, Vivian and I would face it side by side. For the first time in years, I felt ready to move forward, to build a life from the ashes, knowing that this new beginning was finally and truly mine.